Hey YouTube, it's time for the 2019 edition of Intuitive L4E Example Solves. So for those of you who don't know, every year for a while now I've done some intuitive L4E example solves on Pyraminx because Pyraminx is my best event, and so a lot of people have asked for videos like this. So the time has come in 2019 to finally delve into some more intuitive L4E example solves. So before I get into it, I do want to say that this is not a tutorial for intuitive L4E, although it could definitely help you learn it if you're not sure of how the method works and you have a pretty good intuition for how Pyraminx works. And also I do want to say that a lot of these solutions will probably be pretty advanced since I have been doing this for a long time and I am a pretty advanced Pyraminx solver, so some of these solutions might be a bit confusing, but I'll try to make them as easy to understand as I can. So with that out of the way, let's get into the first scramble. Okay, so for this scramble I would start with the green side on the front and the yellow side on the bottom. And the first thing I noticed when looking at this scramble was this bar right here. So that basically means that we'll be able to preserve this green and yellow piece when we solve it in this position. So basically I want to avoid solving this first because then when I solve this center it would knock that piece out. So I won't do that. Instead I will solve this after getting the center already complete. So at this point I'm basically looking to see if there's any way I can block build my entire V. And I see this green and blue piece that will end up here after I do the first move to solve this center. And I realize that when I bring this piece down here, and then I'll bring this center up to solve it, the green and blue piece will end up in this position, with the green on this side. So I can actually turn this center, after bringing this piece down, to match the green and blue piece up in this spot. And that will end up solving the V. So I'll show you what I mean. So I would start the solve by solving these two tips, and going into that move like that. Do this U prime, and then as predicted, when I bring this up with sort of a slice move like that to also solve the tip, it will not only solve this piece in place, but it will also bring the green and blue edge where it belongs. And then we can do this move to solve the V. And so I probably would have looked ahead to see what piece ended up here, but this case is quite easy to recognize, so I would rotate like this. And I see that this is a blue and yellow piece, which belongs in this position. So the way I recognize L4E cases, or at least when I was first starting, is that you have two colors here, and whichever color is down here is basically the center that you want to be here. So we have this blue and yellow piece that belongs in this position, so I would solve that in the back, and then solve L3E like that. But of course I wouldn't have to pause to recognize L3E, it's just a bar here, and it's a 6 mover like that. And then I would AUF like that to solve the whole thing. Okay, so there's our first solve, moving on to the second. Okay, so this solve is actually really nice. So the first thing I notice is this bar here, this red and blue bar. And so I rotate to have red in front and blue on the bottom. And I notice that we want to solve this center and preserve this edge. So we could just move this down, bring the center up and solve it. But that only solves one edge of the V, and it's ideal to solve the entire V during block building if you can. So I would notice this piece, this red and yellow, which is actually one move from being aligned with its center. So instead of going this way to solve that center, we can actually bring this up to solve that center and then also solve this edge. It accomplishes the same thing, but it does more block building, so that's pretty great. And so from here, I would look into L4E, and the first thing I notice is that after we do those moves, this piece, this blue and green, will end up in this position, solved, between the blue and green edges. So that means it's already in the back solved, our back edge is solved when we get to L4E. So this will be our V. Our edge over here will be solved, so that means we're not actually going to have an L4E case, it'll be a last 3 edges case, because these 3 edges are the only ones that can be unsolved. So if we're being honest, in 15 seconds, I might not actually look ahead into which L3E case we would get, because I know it could be one of two. We have the final first layer edge facing this way, so that means it's either going to be a normal insert like that, or a sledge into an insert. So I might not actually check that during inspection, but for the sake of taking this to an extreme, I can see that this edge will not be affected by our V moves, and so that means this edge will stay in the same spot when we're at L3E. And I can also tell that doing those 3 moves just to insert this will not actually solve this edge. So I know that it's going to be a sledge into an insert when we actually get to L3E. That's pretty advanced. You don't have to look that far ahead, but it is helpful and it does allow me to one-look this solve. So anyway, here's how I would execute it. I would start with these tips, and then do those 3 moves to solve this V. And then we rotate, and as predicted, we do not have a simple insert. Instead, we're going to have to sledge and insert like that. And so that was our L3E case. And fortunately, no AUF. There we go. Okay, moving on to our third scramble. Okay, so for this solve, we've got a pretty good 3-move V. So the first thing I notice, of course, is this block, because that's pretty obviously solved. So I'm probably going to want to either do yellow or blue. After looking at the scramble, I settled on yellow. So this is yellow in front and blue on the right here. And the reason I settled on yellow is because if you look at this yellow-red edge here, we can actually solve it in one move. And that is a B move, so it's a little bit not too great to finger trick, but it is very effective in accomplishing our goal of solving a V. So I would take the risk of it not being too finger tricky just to get a good solution. So it's very possible to see this whole V in inspection, and quite a bit more, because after we bring this piece down to solve it, we can just turn the center into place, and then bring this whole block that'll be down here up to solve this V. And you'll notice that after we bring this down, move this over, this piece is red and green, and it will end up here with the red on this side. And then doing this final move won't affect this piece over here. So we know that this will be red, and it'll be over here. So we're going to want to have green in front, the green center, which is what we have now. So after we do the V, in order to set up for L4E, I can see that we're going to have to move this back face back to where we had it before, so we can have the green center in place. And I'll show you what I mean in a sec. And that's all I would look at in inspection. So something that you might have noticed is that I haven't been one-looking many of these solves, and the reason for that is that it's not entirely necessary. It definitely would help, and it is ideal to one-look your solves, but my solves are still pretty much pauseless because I generally have it narrowed down to 1 or 2 possible L4E cases that you can get once you get to L4E. So at that point, even though I'm not one-looking, it's very easy to recognize while I'm actually doing the V that the solve itself still remains pauseless. And that will all just come with practice. So anyway, going back to the solve, we'll solve the V like I said before. So there we go. And now we rotate. And oh wow, so this edge actually ended up solved, which I would notice as I was doing the V. And so that gives us just an L3E case, which is really nice. Just these 3 edges. So it's a sledge, and then an insert. And again, no AUF, so when you do it fast, it would look like this. Okay, moving on to the 4th scramble. Okay, this scramble's really cool. So this scramble is really easy to one-look, because basically you see this big block here, and so this is the yellow side here, and I would try to do the yellow V, which pretty much is going to happen automatically, because if I solve this center, it'll move this edge over to be solved as well, and then I can just bring this center down, and these 2 edges will end up solved. So we'll have this entire V. So there's a 2-move V right there, and you'll also notice that the edge that'll end up in the unsolved part of the V will be this yellow-blue edge, which is just going to be flipped wrong. And so then if we look at the opposite layer to determine the L4E case, we can already see that this piece won't be affected, so we'll have another flipped edge up here. And so at this point, all I need to do is decide if we're going to end up with a 2-flip or a 4-flip for last 4 edges. Because you can't have 3 edges flipped, you can only have an even number, so we already know that the edge here will be flipped and the edge here will be flipped. So if we just trace one more edge, maybe this one, so we'll move the U layer this way, it'll end up here, green will be on this side, blue will be on this side, that's going to end up flipped. So that means all 4 edges will be flipped, and there's also going to be no AUF because this center isn't going to move and this is the green side. So basically we're just going to go into our really fast 4-flip alg after we do the V. So at this point, if I got this in a competition or something, I would actually see this in a couple seconds in inspection, and I would just spend the rest of the time trying to mentally prepare myself for what's about to happen, because basically at this point it's just about turning as fast as you possibly can. The 4-flip alg itself is really a lot of moves for L4E. But it's really fast, really easy to spam TPS on, so that's what I would try to convince myself to do. So as I explained, I would do this, solving the tip in the process, and now we have the V. And then I would rotate, and we do have a 4-flip like I predicted. And so the 4-flip alg I use is this one. So faster it looks like this. And that would be it. So that would be a very high TPS solve, might be able to reach terror speed. That would be pretty crazy. Okay, and finally we'll do one more scramble. Oh, this is stupid. I got this scramble with a solved layer. I would do this. We'll skip that one. In that case, we'll actually do one more scramble. So this is a pretty tough scramble in my opinion. I actually wouldn't block build the entire V for this one, just because I can't see any efficient way to do that. I'm sure there probably is one, but in 15 seconds I realistically wouldn't see it, so I'll show you what I would actually end up doing. So you have the red side in front and the blue side on the bottom. And the first thing I notice is that this red and yellow edge can be gotten into this position by bringing this down and bringing this center back up to solve it. So in the process of solving the center, we also would have solved this edge. And after that, I would have solved this center while tracking this piece. Partially in inspection, partially during the solve, I would probably track this piece. So this would likely end up being quite a bad solve, and I can kind of tell that from inspection. If this were a really high-stakes environment, I would probably try to look ahead a little bit more, but honestly, this is a tough solve to look ahead in, so this probably wouldn't end up that good. So I would start, as I explained, by doing this to solve this edge, and then solving this center, bringing this up, and now rotate. And I see this edge, which is in place to insert just like this, but that would result in a slightly more annoying L4E case, and it's also possible to solve one of these top layer edges while solving this edge. So what I'd actually do in practice is do a U prime to put this here, and then when we sledgehammer this piece in, down there, it'll solve this piece at the same time. And the way I recognize that is because we have a bar here, but this piece is unsolved currently. So doing a sledge will bring this down here and move this over here without actually flipping it. So the yellow will still match, but it'll just be on the other side. Basically, if there's a bar with the color of the V facing you on the other side, then you should sledge, unless this bar is actually solved, of course, because then you would be messing it up. So I would do a sledgehammer to solve that piece, and then rotate, and now we have a last 3 edges case with our solved edge in the back. This is the same case we've gotten quite a few times, so it's a sledge followed by an insert with no AUF but a tip. So this is a pretty good example of how to deal with cases that are really bad to block build. I'd say in most solves you should either be block building or forcing a good L4E case, or both if you can. But I would say on most solves you can definitely do one or the other. If there aren't any good ways to block build, you can pretty much always force an L3E case while you're inserting one of your V edges. And yeah, so that solve is a pretty good example of when block building isn't always necessary. I would still say block building is ideal if you can pull it off, but if you can't, try to find things like that. But yeah, so that's going to be it for our 2019 Pyraminx Intuitive L4E example solves. Hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully this was helpful and relatively understandable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.